So my name is Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a member of the, what am I a member of? Well, I'm actually a member of a virtual group, which meets like 3 times a day. I go to like 3 meetings a day on Zoom. And I also have an active law practice, man. And we get people from all over the world. We have very strange meetings. We don't talk much about drinking. I probably won't talk much about drinking tonight. We talk about giving glory to the one that stopped us from drinking and continues to do incredible miracles in our lives and in my life. I haven't found much to have a drink since January 25th, 1981. Usually I have one of my friends by my side doing the taping or whatever it is, and I say, do you remember my birthday or something? I'm 77 years old. I'm in my 46th year of sobriety. I'm gonna share a few things with you about this is my story. You got it? It's not your story. You know, if you want to take offense at it, I don't want to stop you. If you want to get a resentment, you know, I'm telling you, if I don't have 25% of the audience after the meeting hating my guts and saying who invited that guy, I feel like I'm a failure. You know what I mean? I don't want people walking out of here and thinking about me with hatred for the next week until they put me on a list. Pray and talk to their sponsor, and then 7 years later, they come up to me and say, you know, I used to hate you, but now I love you. You know, and that kind of stuff. I hope you know. You know, I sponsored a preacher. I've been sponsoring a preacher for 25 years. You know, like an ordained guy, like the real deal. I mean, I'm talking about Presbyterian PCA. You know, and you can't. It's illegal. I mean, this is such a serious organization, and you can't have sex standing up because somebody may pass by and think you're dancing. It's a very strange group. And so he got sober and tells me this story. And the story he told me when he was about 3 or 4 months sober is his wife has been going to a psychiatrist for I don't know how many years. And you know, but because of his drinking or whatever, you know, whatever codependents go to psychiatrists for. And she told the psychiatrist, she says, you know, my husband is not drinking, he's sober. And the psychiatrist said, really? He says, yeah, absolutely. He says, well, is he going somewhere? He says, yeah, he goes to AA. He says, oh, that's great. I said, and he said to his wife, he says, well, he must have a sponsor. He says, yeah, he has a sponsor, and he's obnoxious. And the psychiatrist said, you know, some people need obnoxious. Some people need obnoxious. Some people need sarcasm. Some people need to have people tell them the truth. I had alcoholics, thank God, and I've always hung around them. I had alcoholics that loved me so much, they weren't scared to have me hate them. You know, they would look at me and say things to me and get me so upset. And I knew they loved me, and I knew I was sober because of them, but they would hurt my feelings. You know, I don't know if you know, I used to say to my sponsor, I said, you know, I'm sensitive. He said, no, Russ, great artists are sensitive, you're just touchy. You know, I had a gal come to my office once by getting a divorce. She's my officer, she's one of us. And I happened to come from an alcoholic home. My mother was an alcoholic for many years, and I loved my mother, and I hated her. You know, I'd come home one day, and she'd be lying on the front lawn in a negligee. You know, I mean, there'd be, in an alcoholic home, I mean, there's yelling and screaming going on at 3 o'clock in the morning, plates are hitting the walls, my mother's chasing my stepfather around with a butcher knife. I mean, this is the kind of home I lived in, you know, and so this gal comes in to see me. I knew her from meetings and to represent her, and she starts talking, you know, and she says, well, I'll tell you, and we talked a little AA and stuff like that, and about things. She started talking about her husband, this, that, and the other thing, and she then looked at me and she said, and I started talking about the disease, and I started talking AA to her. You know, by the way, I love the name of this church, Good Shepherd. It's one of my favorite quotes is, and he looked at them with compassion because they were harassed and distressed and without direction, like sheep without a shepherd. You know, so I love that story in Matthew about the Good Shepherd. But she was there, and she was slightly confused. You know, some of us get confused. I was confused. And she looked at me and she said, He said, well, I'll tell you something about me. I'm a good mother. I'm a good mother. And I looked at her and I said, you're a crappy mother. You're a horrible mother. You know something? Let me tell you what you are. You are somebody that would sell your children down the toilet for another drink. But I guess that's what you tell yourself. To make yourself feel better about your life, you tell yourself that that's your saving grace, you're a good mother. And she stood up and she said, I didn't come here to hear that crap. You know, I don't want to be here. I said, you know, you can leave. You can have your money back, whatever it is, you constantly, you can leave. And she took her money and she left. And 5 minutes later, I got a phone. My secretary comes in and says, listen, that lady that just ran out of here, she's on the phone. She wanted to know when she'd come back. And she hasn't had a drink since that day. And you know, I know we're very careful about how we talk to newcomers. There's this fable that's going around AA. I'm not part of it, that we talk about God and the Lord or something like that. They'll run out of the rooms. Well, I don't know where they're going. I know where they're going. They're going to get a drink. So they get right back into the rooms. And I know that between 1935 and 1939, we Dr. Bob, good old timers, that you couldn't go to me unless you got on your knees and gave your life to the Lord. I know that Dr. Bob, when he sponsored, when he 12-stepped Clarence, the brewmaster, I know that what he did was he was in the hospital room, and the first question they asked him, he says, what do you think about this? He says, I don't know. He says, I think you're too young. And Clarence says, I was 135 pounds, no job, no money, no nothing. I didn't know how much more ready I could be, but yet I had to convince them I was ready. And then Dr. Bob's first question to this newcomer was, do you believe in God, young fellow? Clarence said he always called me young fellow because, you know, when he called me Clarence, I knew I was in trouble. And he said, well, what does that have to do with it? And Dr. Bob said, everything. He says, I guess I do. And Dr. Bob said, no guessing. You either do or you don't. God is everything or he's nothing. What is your decision going to be? He says, I do. He says, good. Now get down on your knees by the hospital bed. We're going to pray. I don't know how to pray. Well, I guess you don't. This is in our literature, by the way. I guess you don't. But that's okay. Just follow along with me. And he gave me the sinner's prayer. Got down on his knees. And that's when Clarence said this great statement. You know what he said? He said, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. And you could not go to an AA meeting for the first 4 years in AA unless you got down on your knees in front of everybody in AA. They called it the surrender. And that was their version of the white chip. Where, you know, anybody want a white chip? I'll leave it right here so you can come up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not embarrass yourself. You know, something like that. That's the way they did it. You know why? Because, you know, my big book says, I don't know what your big book says, I think sentences are important. You know, I'm an attorney, I'm a wordsmith. And the sentence is this. It says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. The big book was written in 1939. So they were talking about what they were doing between 1935 and 1939. And you know what they weren't doing? They weren't reading the big book. You know what they were reading? If you went up to Dr. Bob and you asked him, what's this all about? He'd say, it's all in the good book. You know Dr. Bob and Dr. Bob and Good Old Timers said the books we found absolutely essential were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the book of James. You know, Bill Wilson, when he first got sober, said, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease that I got to keep talking about it and telling other people. I got to keep talking about it and telling other people. And the reason I say this stuff, I got to tell you something. It's the only shot I had having you, and I know 9% of people in Alcoholics Anonymous never read those books, and you can know about that. You know, they don't know about that. You know, they think talking about God is like, you know, the third rail, you know what I mean? And I know what this thing is all about. I know how it started. I know what the deal is. And you know what I also know? I know that most people drink or commit suicide or are very sad and have real problems after 20 years or 15 years, and there are people here that I know you've been told that they drink because they stopped going to meetings. I know people drink while they were after they were going to meetings. I know that people drink just because. I'll tell you, one of the things that you learn, it's changed a lot in 46 years. One of the things that's changed is that people. How about this in the big book? Anybody read this book? Here and there. This was written by Bill Wilson. He had 3 years, and he was talking. He was actually prophesizing about himself. He said, here and then, once in a while, a former drinker says, feel better, look better, have a better time. We laugh at such salad. We know he's going to try the old can again because he's not happy with his sobriety. No sooner know loneliness as few do. He'll wish for the jumping off place. He'll be at the end. There'll come a time in every alcoholic's life now, no defense against the first drink. His defense has to come from God, from higher power. You know, and I can go through all the quotes in the big book as to what they say and what the story is and all that sort of stuff. And the reason why this is important to me is because I was brought up like you were. I mean, I was in banquet chairman for 2 years in a row. I brought down Johnny Harris and Clancy and all that stuff. And I was I was in love with AA. I worshiped Bill Wilson. I worshiped all these guys. I listened to a Clancy tape every morning driving to the work, driving back from work for 2 years. I could give that talk, you know what I mean? One of my mentors was Ray O'Keefe. I could give his talks, you know what I mean? And Johnny Harris, on my email that I sent out email with a lot of Zoom meetings. I could give Johnny Harris's talk. He talked to me. It was unbelievable. I love those guys. Probably my entire talk is stolen from all of them and that kind of stuff, because that's how we learn this stuff. And you know what Johnny said to me, apropos of what James just said? I asked him for his number. You know, he lived in California, recently passed, and he said, well, it's in the book. I said, your number is... You're in the bill. You're in the book. It's not one of those what they call unlisted. He says, and this is the way I was always talked to by all the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was the best thing that happened to me. He could have said, yes, it's in the book. He didn't say that. He said, Russell, I don't know what fellowship you're in. It's always a shot to the solar plexus first, you know. I don't know what fellowship you're in. But I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm available. My sponsor used to say, whenever anybody asks you to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous, you always say yes. I mean, one time, I don't want to tell you. I got so many, the problem is I have so many stories. Someone told me, why don't you tell this story and that story? Why don't you tell another story? I said, it's a 15-minute story. Why don't you tell the 50-year story? It's a 20-minute story. I said, you can't, they're like children. I grew up with them, and you know. And here's the deal. I'll help a drunk anywhere. And I do believe, to a certain extent, because my mind has changed in the last 46 years, you know? Because most of the people that call me up now, not everyone, I work with a lot of newcomers, but most of the people that call me up now have 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, suffering. And so, suffering and sober, you know, because there's something missing. There's something missing. What does the big book say on the last page? Well, you may not know you, Mr. Bill Wilson, may not know you, Dr. Bob. You know what his last words to Bill were? His last words to Bill Wilson before he died, Dr. Bob, was, let's not screw this thing up. Let's keep it simple. When somebody comes up to you and tells you, let's not screw it up, let's keep it simple, they're not congratulating you. They're trying to tell you something. They're exhorting you. It's sort of like exhorting you to do something with a warning that you're maybe on the wrong track. And Bill Wilson, I hit my bottom sober when I had 10 years, and I was doing everything in AA. 8 years on relay. You called up AA on Friday night between the hours of 8 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night and 9 o'clock the next morning. You got me for 8 years, which is why nobody got sober for 8 years. Wrong guy. And I can tell you, I got stories about that. I had a professor, a PhD in nurse. That's how you learn about Alcoholics Anonymous. Not only being, you know, when you learn about AA and about what here's the deal. The big book says, our drinking is but a symptom of the disease. I didn't come here to talk about the symptom. There's plenty of drunkalards. You can listen to tons of drunkalards. I'm not against drunk, but you want to know something? It's a symptom. None of you guys are suffering from that symptom now. And the only way you're going to suffer from that, because right before you take that drink, you're sober. You're not taking that drink because of a craving. You're taking that drink because you haven't dealt with the disease yet. The disease centers in my mind, not my body. That's why I'm saying this particular type of insanity. I like the idea subtle. It's subtle. I'll tell you, you know what the real disease is? Worrying about what people think about it. You know why I can talk like this instead of just launch your mind into a drunk like this? I'm not worried about what you guys think about me. Because I'm only playing to one person, not playing to you guys. I don't sit around worried about what some guy in the front row of Alcoholics Anonymous thinks about me. It's not because he may be paying my Visa bill or something like that. You know, the bottom line is I'm here just to tell you the truth, my own personal truth, for whatever good it does. But Wilson said, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease. I got to keep talking about it and telling other people. And 2 months later, he was before Henrietta Seiberling. He said, I think you talk too much about God and religion. Henrietta Seiberling, you know what she said to him? This is in our literature, by the way. Conference approved. You know, check into the conference, but it's conference approved. She said, Bill, the only reason you're sober is because of God. And if you don't talk about God and what he's done for you, you might as well be a Rotary Club. She said, finally, he agreed, which in alcohol, if you have that translated for you into alcohol talk, when somebody says finally he agreed, it means he really didn't agree so much, you know what I mean? But the bottom line is read Bill Wilson's testimony, statement, I don't know how many people have read The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. You gotta read that deal. You gotta read it over and over and over again. And he says, I got it all wrong. That's gotta make you feel good. When Bill Wilson says, I got the whole thing wrong. I got it all wrong. I put too much dependence on people, places, things, and on Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. You got a lot of guys with medallions in their pockets that have 20 years, and they're even plated in gold and everything, hanging around their necks like a rabbit's foot and stuff like that, and have no relationship with God whatsoever. You know, a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous that end up drinking or committing suicide because they believe in God, but they don't believe God. Some guy comes up and says, well, I believe in God. I said, oh, you believe in the concept of God? He says, yeah. I said, but do you believe God? They said, what are you talking about? I said, I asked you a very simple question. You said you believe in God. I said, well, do you believe God? Because to believe God and have him sit on the throne of your heart and have him be the central fact of your life means he's real. And you can have a relationship with him all the time. You can talk to him all the time. You have a relationship with him. He's not a rabbit's foot. It's not just something you talk about. So I digress. I drank because no woman, no car, no amount of money, no nothing worked quite as well as just a few drinks, and quite as fast as just a few drinks. Man, what alcohol can do for you. You're walking there, you know, I used to tell myself, maybe I used to tell other people this. I used to say to other people, I don't give a crap what they think about me. I don't give a crap what people think about me. You ever tell yourself you don't care what other people think about you? I mean, I'm just talking about between you and me. I'm just talking about, you ever have conversations with yourself? You ever tell yourself, I don't give a crap what they think about me. Ever say that to yourself over and over again? Let me tell you a little secret. People that really don't care what other people think about them, they don't say that stuff. They say things like pass the ketchup, but they don't say that crap. You know what that is? That's the disease. And you may not even understand you have it. You know what? I had this disease when I was 10 years old. I had this disease years before I took a drink. What alcohol did was it worked on. You see, I'd walk into that bar, what are they going to think about me? How am I going to approach a girl? What are they going to, all this, what are they going to think, this nervousness, this irritability, everybody else seems like they're doing so well and they know how to do things and live life, and everything's so complicated for me. I'd have a couple of drinks. I thought I owned the bar. I could go up to girls, ask them to dance. Dance with you? No. I said, hey, you're lost, honey. You know what I mean? That's what alcohol did for me. I had alcoholism before I started drinking, during the drinking, and after the drinking. And sometimes after the drinking, as the alcoholism is coming upon you, that's when you find about this disease, when you stop drinking. My experience, strength, and hope used to be 15 to 20 minutes of drunk alone. And then what happened? And what happened to me is I lost everything, and I hurt I incredibly hurt people. Didn't give a crap about hurting people. I didn't think of myself. I thought myself was a good guy, but if I told you what I did to some people, I was a horror story to people. Horror story of my first wife. I'm just a terrible, horrible, horrible person. The way I betrayed people and thought nothing of it. And that's who I was. That's my deal. And it got to the point where I was alone on December 25th, 1980. Christmas morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I didn't have what I usually have, because I have a PhD in self-pity. I feel sorry for myself over everything. I didn't have self-pity. I had something the Bible calls godly sorrow. You know what godly sorrow is? Worldly sorrow kills you. That's self-pity. Godly sorrow is when you get to the end of your life, the end point in your deal, and you just become so ashamed of what you had become. So ashamed. You're not feeling sorry for yourself. You're feeling ashamed as to who you are. I turned on the TV. There was some preacher there. I guess at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're preaching on Christmas, they pretty much know they're probably talking to alcoholics. I got kicked out of the bar. And you know what the guy said? And he said, you've gotten to the point where you're at the end of your life, the end of the rope, and nothing's helping you, and you don't know where to go, and you're without help. He says, if you come to the Lord, He's going to fix everything up. And he says, if you want to do it, just down on your knees and repeat after me. Same thing that Dr. Bob said to Clarence Snyder, the brewmaster. And I got down on my knees like a shot. I didn't even think about it. I said the sinner's prayer right there. That's what I said, sinner's prayer right there. Which is not probably a big deal. And I was serious as a heart attack. And it doesn't sound like a big deal to you, but for a Jewish kid from Great Neck, New York, I'm going to tell you something, it's a big deal. You know what I mean? And I did that. And you know something? I'd like to say that 3 preachers showed up with a rabbi at the door and said, with donuts and coffee, and said, hey, we got an egg, but that's not what happened. I continued to drink. And exactly 30 days later, after getting into a car accident, I had my last drink in the hospital. That's when my sponsor, the man who was supposed to be a sponsor, came over and 12-stepped me. I was all set to tell him. He had the wrong guy. He didn't understand. You know what I mean? Those worldly clamors, like Bill Wilson, starts blocking out his presence. You know what I mean? I was desperate. He said, well, and he threw me a curve. He didn't talk about me. I was going to say to him, I know from where you're sitting, you think I have a drinking problem. I understand. I know you think I have a drinking problem. But let me explain something to you. I drink because I have problems. As a matter of fact, my problems perfectly match my drinking. And pretty soon my problems are going to go away. I'm going to get $1 million and everything's going to work out, and that kind of thing. But he threw me a curve. He didn't talk to me about me. He talked about himself and his drinking and what he was doing. I said, man, I did that. Next thing I know, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous picking up a white chip. I'm doing the big shot lawyers, picking up a white chip, doing all that stuff, in front of people. It's almost like going in front of 200 people, and it's like standing up and walking up and picking up a white chip. It's almost like you're telling everybody, I need help. Man, I wish, one of the things it says in the 7th step, of course we know what the 6th step is, right? As the well-loved clergyman says, the man who's actually doing the 6th step is the man or the woman who is trying to get rid of every obstacle so that he can grow in the image and likeness of his Creator. kind of hard to do it when you have no idea who your creator is, or who your God is. Just sort of faking it until you make it. They said I could fake it until I make it, but the bottom line is eventually you got to make it. So, but you know what it says in the second step of that humility? I'll tell you what it says. It says every alcoholic has to have some sense of humility. And I'm not sure I know what humility is, but I sort of know what it is when you first come in. Some sense of humility, or else they'll never get sober. It takes humility to get up and pick up. It takes humility to get down on your knees in front of a bunch of people and do the surrender. It takes humility to pick up a white chair. It takes humility to ask a guy, isn't this about, how, I used to say, how do you get a sponsor? He says, you have to ask them. I said, you have to go to somebody and ask him to be my, can you help me? Yes, it takes humility to ask somebody to be a sponsor. It takes humility to call him back again, to listen to him, to do what he told you to do. My sponsor gave me a 24-hour window. You know, and said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home every day when you wake up. I want you to get down on your knees. I want you to read the 24-hour book, and I want you to ask God to help you stay sober just for that day. And I don't remember him asking me whether I believed in God. He just said, do it, and I did it. I don't even know why I did it. But you know what else it says? It's unless this precious commodity, humility, is not attained, if we do more than this, you will never, an alcoholic will never become truly sober. Truly happy. And I buried a guy for 47 years, who was a wonderful guy. I did meetings with him, and he did all the steps, and he did everything, and he loved drunks every night. He had 47 years. You know why? Because he couldn't get rid of his depression. And you know, and I can tell you one thing I know about that gentleman who I love very much. He couldn't get rid of his depression. And the only time we had arguments, the only time we ever argued, we love each other. We're like twins, and the only time we ever had an argument is he'd say, I'm never going to meet with you too because you talk too much about God. That's what I know. That's my experience. And you know, whenever I have somebody come up to me who's 20 years and 25 years and 30 years, and they're suffering from false pride, or anger, gluttony, or greed, you know, lust, sloth, whatever, and they're going to meetings and they're sponsoring 10 million people and doing all that, you know what? And they tell me, I'm doing this, I'll do another fourth step, I'll do another fifth step, I'll double up on my, and all that sort of stuff, sponsoring more people. I said, you tried that, it didn't work, did it? He says, no, it hasn't. He says, it's always because they have no relationship with God. They misunderstood that there is only one that has all power, and that one is God. May you find him now. And then they put down the steps as a way of practicing it, so maybe one day you'll get there. You'll get there and not be ashamed of talking about it, maybe, because I don't know what book you're reading, but the book I'm reading says each alcoholic in his own language, from his own point of view, talks about how he discovered and built and maintained and improved his relationship with God. That's what I understand I'm supposed to do. I don't know what the group's supposed to do, that's what I'm supposed to do. And the only reason people don't do it is because they're scared crapless that other people will come up to them and say, you're killing newcomers, or you're doing this, because they're scared, because they're worried. And you know, did you know there's a promise in the book? If you're really doing this thing, there's a promise. It takes a little time. You may never get rid of it. It says, if you do this right, you will lose fear of others. You'll lose fear of others. Dr. Bob was not afraid. Dr. Bob wrote down, he said, the books we found absolutely essential, 1 Corinthians 13, Book of James, and Sermon on the Mount. Did you know what the first AA meeting was? Did you know this? It was in the grapevine. Dr. Bob put his foot on the rug of the dining room chair and read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Hey, listen, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Now, I'm not telling you, you don't have to do anything. You can mosey around for 5, 10, 15 years and do a lot of 4 steps and 5th steps, sponsor everybody and everything, and come to 10 years like I came to 10 years. Doing everything, tried everything, and you know. And you know what's the crazy thing about this disease? You talk about a subtle foe. Let me tell you, you know what I think? Why is it subtle foe? Because it's easy when you get double-digit sobriety, to think that you finally made it. You're, what is it we say? We're spiritual, not religious. Yeah, didn't you know that? You get 10 years, you might evolve into some sort of spiritual, non-earthly creature. You know what I mean? Yeah, you're just so, I just been through some alcohol today, that's why, man, a spiritual guy, you know? You're spiritual. You know what I am? I'm the Madonna of AA. What did she say? She's a material woman. I'm a material woman in a material world, you know? I sat there at my first AA meetings and I saw some blonde in the corner there and I said to my sponsor what I always said when I was sitting in the bar, it's just like another bar to me, we were drinking, and I'm hitting him like that, and he's saying, well, he says, look at that blonde over there. He says, Russ, what do you usually drink? I said, Scotch, I'm a Scotch drinker, top shelf stuff. He said, yeah. He says, like what? He says, J&B and stuff like that. He says, Russ, you see that blonde over there? He says, yeah, for you, that's a bottle of J&B with legs. I said, I'm sort of laughing, I'm sort of chuckling, you know what I mean? I said, so I'm 10 years sober and I'm going down the tubes. Not drinking, but because the interesting thing about being an alcoholic is when all your life you've been an alcoholic, from 10 years to 18 years to when you have your first drink or whatever it is, when you've been an alcoholic, you suffer from every disease, everything you're suffering from now as an alcoholic, you suffer from when you were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You're used to feeling that way. Our alcoholic life, our alcoholic thinking seems normal to us. Seems normal, doesn't seem outrageous. That's the alcoholism that lives in your mind, not your body. Then I start drinking and it goes away. Then I stop drinking and it comes back again. But I don't think it's abnormal to second guess myself. I don't think it's abnormal to worry about what people think about me. I don't think it's abnormal to lie to myself. And I don't think the way I am is abnormal. You know, you with me? You can actually, do you think there are people that have 25 years in AA that are not happy? Do you think there are people that have 30 years in AA that are happy? You know, every time I'm talking to a group, I know there's somebody out there with 11 years who in 6 months or maybe a year from now are going to commit suicide or they're going to drink. And they don't even know it. So if you're one of those people that you haven't even go, like Marlboro cigarettes, I don't think they have those commercials anymore. Smoking more, enjoying it less. You go to all the AA meetings and you're hearing the mantra, right? Don't drink, go to meetings. Don't drink even if you had asphalt sauce. Don't drink, and you're not drinking. And you're lonely. But you're doing the steps that night. You're doing meeting that night. What are you gonna do? You're gonna tell your group, listen, I'll tell you, I've got 20 years, I just want to tell you I feel like killing myself. How are you gonna do that deal? Big shot. You know what I mean? So I got 10 years and I'm going down the tubes and I don't know what to do. And I run into a guy, he's not even AA, he's a good friend of mine, spiritual guy, goes to church and all sorts of stuff. And I tell him what's going on, I tell him I'm going to AA and everything like that. And the whole bit, I'm feeling lousy. He says, you know, Russ, I'd love for you to come to my Bible study on Thursdays at 7:30 in the morning. I'd love for you to do that because I think that would help you out. You know, you can really put some color, it's like coloring book. You can put some color in that coloring book. You can put some flesh on the bones. You can actually make God the central fact of your life. You could actually make that the number one deal, you know? Like they talk about in their groups and everything like that. You can do that. God is everything or he's nothing. What's your decision going to be? You can do what they say in the last page of the big book. Well, you may, but we won't know you. What do they say? They say it's not important. God will determine that because your real deal has to be dependent upon him. That's what it says in the last page. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. He will even show you who you hang around and who you don't hang around. Who are serious as a heart attack about this thing and not ashamed of depending upon God. Do you think alcoholics are ashamed of talking about God? You think they feel shame? You think alcoholics feel shame? They hold hands, they say the Lord's Prayer, they say the third step prayer. You think alcoholics are ashamed to get up and do what I'm doing? Well, then why did they put that thing in the big book? It is there, isn't it? Where it says, we never apologize for our faith in God. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. And then they say again, we never apologize for God. We're never ashamed of God. Instead, they let him demonstrate through their testimony what he's done for them. At once, he began to outgrow fear. What would your life be like if you were fearless? You know, if you're fearless in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you worry about what people think about you in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the real dis-ease, if you're fearful in AA, where God is all over the walls, all over the big book, all over Dr. Bob Good Old Timers and the 12 and 12, if you're scared to talk about that, and your own personal deal with that deal, because you're worried about what people in AA are going to think about you, you don't even have a shot in the real world. If you can't talk about it here, and the only reason I say this, maybe you'll think about it and say, maybe I do have that part of the disease that hasn't gone away. And why do I have it? Why am I scared to actually tell people or talk about it? Because I want you to know there are people in AA. You know how many conventions I've been to and things like this and banquets I've gone to where they do the countdown? You guys ever been to those things? I love the countdowns. Sometimes they actually do them right. It's like a message, you know what I mean? I don't want to criticize everyone because I probably screwed up, but I mean, there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, you know? But the bottom line is, like, they do the countdown, and you ever notice that, you know, 1 year, like 3 or 4 people stand up, 5 years, some people, and as they go down the thing, it gets, you know, they'll actually skip a year, and nobody will stand up, and this year, then it gets up to the 20s, right? And then all of a sudden, 20, 21, 22, 23, some guy stands up, 24, 25, 3 guys stand up, 26 stands up. You ever notice? You could probably, after around 30, you could actually fire off a gun and shoot loose in the room. You're not going to hit anybody. You got one guy there with 40, you got one guy there like Willard, you know what I mean? Maybe Willard's there. One guy, what happened? They're not all dead. They're all drank again or somebody else. You know, I used to be a member of the car room, and they would have birthdays along the wall, and it was a huge room. It was like this, and they have birthdays, and the way they did it, it wasn't stacked like this across the wall. They'd have year 1, and they'd have like 2 people, year 2, 3 people, year 3, 2 people, year 4, nobody, year 5. And you could see it across the wall, and you could see that there were years, especially where nobody was picking up a chair. Like, what happened to those people? And we sit here in this group, we think, well, everybody stays sober. You get around 40 years, and we'll see how many people stay sober and what's really going on. You start talking to people. So I got sober. So I went over to my sponsor. I got my beautiful wife is here. Where is she? There she is. My beautiful wife. I like to refer to her as my current wife, keep her on her toes. And that girl right there, Eileen, stand up. That's my granddaughter. I got 4 kids with 8 granddaughters. She goes to UT. That's my contribution to your culture here. And her brother, Zach, also goes to UT. You know what I mean? So they congratulate me. Well, thank you for coming here. I want to see my granddaughter. You know what I mean? That's the deal. I got grandkids all over the place. They don't want to hang out with me, but that's okay. And so I go up to my sponsor, and I have no money. I got big shot lawyer, I got 50 bucks. I graduated Department of Honors Mathematics, you know, all sorts of stuff, going my PhD in algebraic topology. I meet this girl, you know, I'm in love with her, you know what I mean? I decide to become a lawyer, because her father's a lawyer, you know what I mean? That's the deal. And people, I'm a brainstorm. Gradually, I wake up one day and say, why am I become, I've been trying to be a math professor for 10 years now. He says, why do I, and somebody said, why'd you become a lawyer? He says, oh, well, because I've always liked the law, I like talking and stuff like that. I mean, you know, it was like 10 years later when I was at AA, I became a lawyer to get in some gal's pants. Now, you may think that shows a lack of integrity, you know what I mean? Well, that's only because you didn't drink in the bars that I drank in looking for the stuff I was looking for. You know what I mean? I wanted what she had, and I was willing to go in late to get it. I spent the last cent I had, you know what I mean? You forget, you're laughing, you don't know what it's like. I would change careers to get laid, you know what I mean? It's like unbelievable. Yeah, you guys think it's funny. Let me tell you something, it's a serious disease, I'll tell you that. I spotted some guy named Kevin. Kevin was like 6 months sober, sharp guy, looked like Clint Eastwood and everything like that. He would hook up with the gal, he hooked up with this gal named Lucy. He's living with her. He calls her and says, Russell. I said, what? He says, He says, last night, Lucy tried to stab me with scissors, while I was sleeping. I said, Kevin, I want you to listen to me. When a woman tries to stab you with shears before you go to sleep, that's God's way of saying, you need to move. And Kevin says to me, but Russell, what about love? What about second chances? What about tolerance? What about actually sticking with people and honoring your commitment? And all of a sudden I'm saying, maybe I'm wrong. I can go down wrong, you know what I mean? And 2 days later he was drinking. So then Kevin goes to jail. Kevin goes to jail at a place where they're treating alcoholism up in upstate Florida, in Tampa. I go with my wife to see him in Tampa. I said, watch it, because he got out. He did the 9-day program. They actually picked him out because he started having an affair with some gal who was also over there, and they're living together now. Him and Andrew. She said she's gorgeous. You know what I mean? I met her. I know we have something in common, our disease. Which is always good to start off with. And I said, well, let's meet at Burn Steakhouse. I'll buy you a steak and everything like that. And he calls me up, and he doesn't show up. I said, Kevin, we're at the steakhouse. Where are you? He says, Russell, you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe. Annie, I said, what about? She's upstairs on the balcony, looking up in our townhouse, and she's nude, and she's got a bottle of vodka in one hand, and she's drunk. She's got a butcher knife in the other hand, and she's screaming. I said, Kevin, what is she screaming? She's screaming, leave! I said, Kevin, listen to me. You need to leave. He says, what if she commits suicide? What if she does this? I says, what do you don't say? He says, Kevin, you need to leave. She's going to leave. He says, yeah, but Russell, what about love? What about commitment? What about tolerance? You know what I mean? All sorts of stuff. And of course, he doesn't leave. He ends up drinking everything. This is how you learn. You learn about alcoholism sober, without any buffers, experiencing it in yourself and to other people, and talking to. I go up to my sponsor and I say, Bob Sullivan. I say to him, I'm broke, I don't have any money. I'm worried about it for weeks. I'm not telling anybody about what I'm going to do. I got $50 in the bank, and I'm going to do. I'm driving my big Cadillac and everything. He says to me, he says, Russ, I'm going to solve that. I said, no, I'm not going to talk to my crewmate. Not that I care what they think about me. I'm not going to tell my crewmate. They think I'm a big shot or something. And so he says, Russ, look, I'm going to solve that problem. Really? He says, I'm going to solve that. He's, man, I knew I had the right sponsor. The right sponsor. You know what I mean? So after the meeting is over, he says, that thing you're going to solve? He says, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to solve it right now. Come with me. Walks me over to the coffee pot. He started showing me how to make coffee for the group. He was making coffee. He showed me how to make coffee for the group. I had like a year. He shows me how to make coffee for the group, how to set up the chairs. And he said, I thought we were going to solve the money. He said, yeah, this is it. You're going to be the coffee maker for the group. And I'm thinking, I don't think I really explained myself. We're talking, it's great, but I'm talking money. It's not important, just right up there with oxygen, So he teaches me how to play. So I go home, and then I'm supposed to show up the next day to make the coffee, but no money came in. So I was like, I wasn't even depressed. I was very, very depressed. And I didn't want to go to make the coffee because no money had come in. But I had to go to make the damn coffee because what would they think about me if I didn't make the coffee? So since I'm spiritual jiu-jitsu, I went up and I made the coffee. I made it for 3 months, and the money came in, and everything was okay. And some guy came up to me and said, I could be the coffee maker. I said, who appointed you? I'm the coffee maker for this group. I made coffee for 18 months for that crazy group, 10 years, I'm 10 years married to this love. I got, listen, every one of you guys needs to get married. If I'm going to suffer, you need to suffer too. You learn a lot about being married, So I had a fight with the lovely. She's always right, by the way. I'm going to end with 2 more stories. I'm just going to do 2 stories of. I'm going to give you just a couple of samples of what's going on. So by the way, this guy said to me when I went up to him, I don't believe this, he says, you need to start going to Bible study. I said, and I told him, I said, no, you don't understand. I'm spiritual, not religious. And you know where I got that from? I got that from Alcoholics Anonymous. Religion bad. I know the big book says, it talks about lose all prejudice, even against organized religion, see where they're right. I know the big book encourages church membership and things like that, but forget that stuff, you know what I mean? I've been going to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and nobody interprets the big book and what they actually say in the big book in the 12-12 better than the fellowship. And the fellowship will beat the crap out of you if you talk the way I'm talking, dude. So you get the clear impression that don't look at that stuff in the big book that says this, only look at it that says, and you can rest on the laurels and head for trouble if you do. So I showed up there, and I met 40 men who were 60, 70, 80, and 90 years old, and they all looked like Willard over there. And they were talking about the same stuff we were talking about, defects and sins and everything like that. The only thing that they talked about, they didn't talk about drinking and drumming, they talked about him. They talked about there is one who has all power, and I wanted what they had. I went to an AA meeting once. There was a guy named Al Kennedy talking. He had 45 years. He did an amazing talk. I love the guy. He was just loving people, talking about people, uplifting people. He left the room. I said, man, I told my sponsor, I said, man, I like that guy. I'd like to hang out with him. What's his home group? And this is the same sponsor who said the coffee thing. He said, Russell, he's dying. He's dying. I thought he didn't hear me because that's the way he'd never answer a question I had. He'd say, why don't you just leave a drink or something? He never had. I said, no, I'm talking about Al Kennedy. I just spoke. I want to know what group he's with. He says, Russ, he's dying. I said, what do you mean he's dying? He didn't say anything about dying because he didn't say anything about dying. He's just trying to help people. He said, Russ, I know he didn't say anything about dying, but he's dying. He has terminal cancer. He has 6 months to live. And 6 months later, he was dead. Now I'm going to tell you something very interesting. That one thing, 40 years ago, that I saw in AA, changed my entire vision of what this thing was all about. I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't drink, go to meetings, not drink. It's like a real big deal. But I wanted Al Kennedy's, whatever the heck Al Kennedy had, that they weren't talking about in meetings. You know what I mean? I wanted, because I'll tell you, if I have a hangnail, that's good for 3 weeks of meetings, you know what I mean? I wanted whatever it is that guy had, you know what I mean? That he could be dying of cancer, stage 4 cancer, and he's just trying to help people, and he's happier than anybody else in the building. And I didn't know you could get that in AA, and I went to this Bible study, and I met 40 guys that were like that. And those are the people I hang around. Those are the people I hang around. You keep on going and finding the men and women you'll wind up being like. And the way you'll be like in 5 years will depend upon who you hang out with and the books you read. The books you read will depend upon who you hang out with. And that's the deal. I was just, and so the two last things I'm going to say to you, because I think they're good stories, there's a lot of good stories, is I went up to my sponsor once. That's what I learned about marriage. I went up to my sponsor once and I told him I was going to get divorced because myself and Lovely had a fight over something. And that was before I learned that she's always right and I'm always wrong. And we had a fight about something. I said, I didn't sign up for this crap. I didn't sign up for this stuff. You know, and I'm 10 years sober and I know I'm going to sign up for this. And since I'm going to get divorced. And he said, and I told him, I explained to that man, my sponsor, my first sponsor died was Joe Steiner. I explained to him in detail what she had said. I said this and she said that. She disrespected me. She said this and they said that. And I gave him the whole thing in detail. And he looks at me and this is what he says. He says, so why are you upset? I said, what are you talking about? He says, why are you upset? He said, I just spent 20 minutes telling you exactly what you did. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I'll tell you what, the guys in the bar would have understood it. The guys in AA, if I told them all of that, they would have understood it. I could win this before any jury. There's no question, you know. I'm not only right, I'm out-y right. If you don't agree with me, you got to be killed because you're so stupid. You know what I mean? That's why I'm upset. He says, Russell, do you know why you're upset? I said, yeah, because what I do. He says, no, there's nothing. You know why you're upset? And I said, and I knew he knew something I didn't know. You know how you know when you know somebody's going to tell you something? And I said, no, I don't know why I'm upset. He said, would you like to know? And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to know. I said, yeah. I said, you sure? I said, yeah, I'd like to know. I said, well, I don't know. You really would want to know why you're upset? He says, you know why I'm upset? Oh, yeah, it's obvious. It's obvious. He says, yeah, it's obvious. What are you going to tell me? I don't know. What do you really need to know? I said, I want to know. Why am I, now I'm yelling at him. Why am I upset? He said, listen, stupid. You know, it's always with the unkind words, you know what I mean? Listen, but you know what about the unkind words? When he hits me with the unkind words, listen, stupid, you know, I don't know what fellowship you're in, but I'm available. Those are the things I remember 30 years later. He said, listen, stupid, you're upset because, anybody here ever been upset? You didn't sleep with him. You want to know? You're upset because you're upsettable. I said, what is this, like Zen AA? And then, you know, my sponsor, my current sponsor told me a story. He said, a guy went over to his priest right in front of him. It was a true story. He said, I'm leaving my wife because I don't love her anymore. And the priest said, well, then love her. And he said, no, you don't understand. I'm leaving her because I don't love her anymore. And he says, yeah, I said, I heard you. I said, well, then love her. He says, I said, Father, you're not listening to me. The reason I'm leaving my wife is I don't love her anymore. I said, I heard you. Well, then love her. He says, love is not an emotion. It's a decision. You decide you're going to love your wife in sickness and health and anything, no matter what. You make a decision as an adult, as a man. It's had something to do with sex or what she is. You decide you're going to love this woman, you're going to protect her. I didn't know that. Did you know that? Last story. This happened about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And I have witnesses to this one. So I walk out the door of my bedroom in the morning, and I see my wife, and the front door is open, and she's bringing in this large package. And it's an industrial strength pressure cleaner to clean tiles or something. And I immediately, Price is Right, because I'm out there in women trying to make a few bucks, and I'm looking at this thing, I say, that's $400 to $500. Bam! I said, I'm already $400 or $500 in the hole for a pressure cleaner that we don't even need, okay? Because my wife, trust me, if there's something wrong with the house, we got to knock down the whole thing and get another one, you know what I mean? So we don't even need it. So I say, you ready for this? And I don't know what I had. I had like 36 years or 37 years. I don't know, 40 years. I don't know what I had. I said, oh, you got a pressure cleaner? And she says, yes, I did. I said, okay. And then I see her walk outside. I don't know what she's doing. And she brings in another pressure cleaner. A second pressure cleaner. Same as the first. And I look, and now I'm $1,000. And I'm not feeling good about this stuff, because apparently that thing, you remember when I went to my sponsor and saying I'm broke, apparently that money thing had never completely left me. I can tell by this group it's left you, you don't worry about stuff like that. Never. And so I say to my wife, that guy over there, I say, without raising my voice, I say, oh, you bought two. I'm giving you word for word on this, so you understand the suffering I've been through. And she says, yes, I bought two. And I then say, I don't know what you guys would have said, I said, why did you buy two? And she says, are you ready? because I wanted to. And I'm about to say one more thing that I can't even tell you what I was about to say because we're in a church. It's a sacred place, but I want to tell you something. It had some spicy language in it, and it would have been much louder, like mine, you know? And all of a sudden, because I guess I was hanging around with those men in that Bible study for 30 years, and all of a sudden, that thought was captured. And another thought came into my mind. It wasn't my thought. It came from another place. And it said, Russell, I heard it clear as well, you got the best answer you're ever going to get from this woman. And I shut up and smiled and walked into the kitchen. Story's not over. The best part is not over. 3 days later, Saturday morning, I do a workshop every Saturday. Do it on Zoom usually, but that, yeah, it was, and I walked outside. I had 3 of my sponsees there, and they were going to be participating in the workshop, and my wife's standing there, and she's standing there with a pressure cleaner outside by the pools with a pressure cleaner, but she's just standing there. I said, "What's going on?" He says, "The pressure cleaner doesn't work." I say, "Well, why don't you just get the other pressure cleaner?" She yells at me, "I knew you couldn't let it go. You couldn't let it go. I know." And it's just been carrying around this hand grenade that was there for 3 days, you know what I mean? You know? That must have been so painful when I just started arguing with you. "I knew you wouldn't let it go. For your information, I bought it for my cousin. There, you see?" So, you know, but now I have 3 witnesses. I got 3 sponsees that see how I'm being tortured on a daily basis. I'm surviving that thing. I'm walking through that fiery furnace, you know what I mean? And that kind of thing. So, thank you for allowing me to give you a little talk about this stuff. Thank you. God bless.
Recovery Inspiration is sitting right there waiting for you. Rocketed.org AA speaker recordings brings real voices and real stories straight to your ears. Subscribe now so you never miss a new recording dropping. Keep that motivation on tap and help spread the word. Hit subscribe and let recovery find you every single day.